You know, it really shouldn't be Homo reptilia because Homo is a genus of mammals, and these clearly are not. Alright, folks, we got the next two-parter of Series 5. We have The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. Written by our current showrunner, Chris Chibnall, which of course means my comments are going to be filled with people complaining about Series 11, even though this episode is nothing about Series 11. Ha! This is fine. Anyways, so this is the return of the Silurians. And yes, I'm going to call them that. I'm not going to call them Homo reptilia to the show. Now, the Silurians are a classic era monster. First introduced in the Third Doctor's era with Pertwee. So bringing them back, I think, was an interesting choice. Now, this is also an instance where, I mean, some people who make these arguments will make them regardless, but this is definitely one of those creatures where you can't say that the modern era is doing anything weird or disrespectful by taking a political angle on this, because the Silurians have always been political, much like in the way the Daleks have always had a political angle to them, because the Daleks were Nazis. And the Silurians and the tension between them and human beings was very reminiscent of the Cold War in a number of points. Sort of a mashup of Cold War and concerns in regards to native populations who were displaced and were like, hello? And that's another kind of thing from the classic era, is there's a running thread of the Silurians basically having a point and the Doctor really trying to get things to work, and they don't. That's kind of the running thing with this entire species, which really does make you feel bad for them. And again, makes this very true to the original. So there are a number of things that I quite like about this. Smith is great in this particular episode. Both Amy and Rory are really good, which is very helpful for what happens at the end, but I'll get there. I really like the character of Nazreen. She had a terrific rapport with Smith, like to the point that I kind of wish they could have found an excuse to keep her around, or like have her come back at some later date, except the way the episode ends, you can't really... Well, I suppose you could. I mean, the guy time travels. Yeah, we could bring her back. Let's do it. Like, because I love her going up to the TARDIS and he's trying to talk her into not coming with him. He's like, it's going to be dangerous. And she's like, so's crossing the road. I'm like, okay, I like you. I like you a lot. So she was nice. I dug her. I like the redesign for the Silurians. It's much more, it's much more human than the original one was. But also, you know, the old classic monsters were very rudimentary masks, so they couldn't do, you know, fine latex, really adheres to the face, moves with the facial movements of the actors kind of work the way that we can do now. So I like that they had the masks, which felt more like an homage to the original design, and then you take it off and you get this much more fine detailed look, and you're like, yeah, they couldn't have done that back in the day. But like the mask felt a little bit like a nod, and I also like that it's established because the original Silurians get brought up, and the Doctor says different subspecies or different tribe, or like he acknowledges that they're not exactly the same, but they are sort of generally speaking along the same lines, you know, to cover for the fact that, yeah, these ones look different, which also isn't that far off because we've already established multiple branches, because the Sea Devils are related to the Silurians. That's more classic era. Sea Devils are another classic era monster who really should come back at some point. But anyways, there are nitpicks to be had with this, because the overall plot and concept and the themes, I would say, are all solid. The ideas being explored through the Silurians, the ideas of, you know, trying to find a way to basically share the planet, with two rival sides, people on either side getting overly emotional in a way that damages the possibility for peace, and things like that. It's good ideas, and a lot of those core ideas are approached pretty well, but there's a lot of oddities and things that don't quite work in the fine details. I mentioned Nazreen and said that she's really good. Part of the reason I mentioned her is because the rest of the supporting cast is okay. There's a couple of things working against them. The first is the fact that there's too much time spent with them in, wait, who are you? This is impossible mode. Because in my mind, unless you're truly going to make that part of the story, like, say, for instance, Midnight did, then you kind of need to have your supporting cast get over the surprise and shock of the Doctor and the situation kind of quickly, because you can make an argument, well, human beings wouldn't get over it quickly. That's fine, but like, for the sake of the story, you need to have them get over it quickly so that we can move forward, because we as the audience already know who the Doctor is and are accepting the situation, and having characters standing around going, no, this is impossible, for more than like 10 seconds, like, it starts to drag the thing down, and that goes on for just a little bit too long, and it feels like a stalling tactic. It feels like a padding tactic, just to have them take longer to accept what's going on. There's also some very odd little moments that serve the plot, but I'm like, wait, what? Like when I'm going to start getting into more plot specifics, which is slightly more spoilery. If you haven't rewatched it lately, go do that. It's still solid. It's pretty good. It's not terrible, but I am, in my complaints, which I do, I am going to complain a little bit more. So when the kid, they're fortifying this church, and the kid says, I need to get my headphones, and leaves. Now, okay, I can grant that there's some truth that kids of that age can kind of get tunnel vision, or can think, oh, I have the time to do this, when really they don't. Like, I can accept that, okay, but I'm sorry, whether I can say that I could believe it might happen or not, it still makes that kid look incredibly stupid. In the context of the show, he leaves the fortified building in order to go get headphones. Really? And then there's weird little things like the Doctor, he notices, oh, they're coming up from underground, and he rigs up this thing and he's like, ooh, heat signatures. But then a little bit later, he goes out in the woods and he can't see them with like infrared or like thermal or something, because they're cold-blooded. Well, if they're cold-blooded, what the heck were the heat signatures? I feel like this needed a pass from an editor, just to catch some of this stuff. And also, like, seriously, why in the hell does part 2 open with this narration from the leader of the Silurians? Why? Like, it tells us absolutely nothing that the episode just shows us. Like, there's no new information. It's weird and jarring because it wasn't in part 1. It doesn't set anything up. It doesn't better explain anything. And then when it shows up again mid-episode, like over the negotiations between the Silurians and humans, it's like, why? It's a whole big old thing of no. Totally unnecessary. I also take some issue with the depiction of, I'm just going to call her the general, her name, Reslick? I can't remember the character's name. But the one who's leading the military forces of the Silurians, who's really pushing for things to escalate to war. I'm going to have to explain this because it's funny. I actually feel about this similar to how I've mentioned in the past. I feel often about the depiction of religious characters in some of the fiction that I like to take in. And I find I take issue with depiction of military characters for a similar reason. Which is that military leaders being shown as so gung-ho for war that they'll basically just start it themselves. And there's a couple of things I take issue with that. I mean, I'll be completely honest. I haven't known a ton of people who've done military service, and nobody at a commander or officer level. I'll cop to that. But the people who I've known who have had any kind of military service, they don't want to fight. They want there to be peace. They take up the service because they believe it's necessary to take arms in order to help ensure it, but they don't want war. And I feel like depictions and stories like this so often show military people as actively wanting a war. Now, granted, to a certain extent, you can chalk this up to a need for vengeance because her sister does get killed. But even before that, she is so gung-ho. And then they push her to the point... Well, actually, let me back up. Let me say that, like, to some degree, I understand the logic behind depicting characters like this because there is some validity, I think, to the idea of somebody with a military mindset is going to see in any situation the military option first because that's just how they have been trained and have been living, and that's how they think. It's the principle of when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, diplomats always push for diplomatic. The military, not necessarily push for the military option, but that's the way they think. So that's the first thing they're going to bring up. There's some validity to that, and I get that. But when you push it to the level that episodes like this take it to, and I've seen done lots of other places, where she actually murders a member of her own species in order to ensure that she can instigate a war. I'm like... And again, much like with what I've talked about with the depiction of religiously minded people in sci-fi and fantasy fiction as being idiots, like lacking even the most basic common sense, simply because they have faith. Similar to that, part of what annoys me about this thing with military characters being this war-hungry is that I see it so much. And I guess I'd like to think at least it wouldn't bother me so much if I didn't feel like it was maybe not quite ubiquitous, but the majority of times I see an antagonistic military character, they literally are craving war. And I see it so often that it just... No. Like, I've started to develop a real strong distaste for it. And it feels like lazy cop-out writing that also feels unfair, to be completely honest. Because I think you still could have made this work without pushing her to that level, without having her kill a member of her own species. You could have it driven more by her emotions and she acts rashly, because her sister is dead. Because you can't really argue that that's the case. Yes, she gets emotional, but then she goes about doing stuff that it really seemed like she already wanted to do, and doing it in a fairly calculated way. So this doesn't come across as rash or emotional decisions. This comes across as, those military people, right? And I don't like that. Not that, and that annoys me as well. Let's circle back to something pretty decent with Amy and Rory. Karen Gillan really sells the pain of Rory's death and of trying to hold on to him. And then Matt Smith really sells the melancholy when he realizes that she has, in fact, forgotten him. And everybody does really good work with that. And I actually like some of the lines in terms of sort of explaining some of the timey-wiminess, because, Amy brings up, is this what happens in the future? And the doctor says, look, some things are fixed and must always play out a certain way. This is not one of those times. This is an opportunity. It was nice to see that happen this way, because I feel like most of the times that fixed points in time get brought up, it's because we are in one, so we can't change it. Now it's like, no, this totally isn't. We could rewrite history, and it would be awesome if we could. If we can pull this off. I liked that. And relatedly, they did a very good job with the whole thing of, the Amy and Rory waving at each other, and then at the end it's only Amy, and she doesn't realize that somebody's missing, yet somewhere inside she realizes something's off. So, and even though, like, I suppose this is one of the better uses of the crack in time on an actual narrative that it takes place in, as opposed to just kind of being there. But, I still don't love the storyline. But for how it's used here and its impact on the characters, its impact on Amy especially, it's pretty dang well done. So this two-parter overall is a mixed bag. It's a solid reintroduction of the Silurians, keeping true to the themes of the sorts of stories that were always told with the Silurians, and the way they were depicted and the way they would have things resolved for them. Sticks really well to that. Matt Smith is doing great. He has some excellent line readings at various points. Not breaking and entering. Sonicking and entering. Completely different. And Rory is great, and Amy is great, and the character of Nazreen is great. But there's maybe not an equal number, but a pretty decent number of things that aren't quite there. With the supporting cast that isn't Nazreen is just fine. They're okay. They're not great. The depiction of the military character, I have my issues with. The kid acts like such an idiot in that moment. Little hiccups like it's a heat signature. Oh, wait, they're cold-blooded. Yeah. So, it is a mixed bag. It's still pretty solid, though. I would rate it as decent. Rate it? I don't rate. What am I doing? I need to go to bed is what I need to do. So, when was the last time you rewatched this two-parter? If you have thoughts on it, whatever they are, whether you've rewatched it recently or not, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Bunch of stuff to do down there as well. You can support me on Patreon. It helps grow the channel. It helps me cover my bills. There's additionally the good old-fashioned like and the subscribe, both of which help and are greatly appreciated. Plus other links down there besides. Links to my socials and the book that I wrote. My P.O. Box address is down there if you want to send anything to that address. All sorts of stuff. Click on links or don't. You don't have to, folks. At the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.